Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to finally review Lincoln's Melancholy by Joshua Wolf Shenk. It was written in 2005. It's a psychological biography of an unlikely but critical U.S. president, Abraham Lincoln. And it's told in three parts. The first part kind of deals with his first mental fall, and it's roughly the 1830s. The second part corresponds to his second mental fall, which is roughly the 1840s. And the third part tells his ascension, which is roughly the mid 1850s to his death in 1865. Sorry if that's a spoiler. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th U.S. president, but it was very unlikely that he would become president because he was in many respects a failure. He was first an intellectually driven man, which disappointed his father. He worked principally as a lawyer, but was also driven to achieve in the political arena, but was several times on the losing side of decisions. And he was also somewhat of a loser in love. Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln's marriage was not, I would consider, a romance for the ages exactly. And Joshua Joshua Wolf Shenk tells this story simultaneously as a deep critical analysis of sources relating to Abraham Lincoln, including Lincoln's writings, as well as the larger collection of works that were written about Lincoln or to Lincoln or were received from Lincoln by correspondents at the time. And he does this deep critical dive with a sharp eye for indications of how Abraham Lincoln felt, which is a fairly unusual approach to doing history. And doing history, we typically try to focus on what happened, how it happened, why it happened, but not the psychology of these historical actors that we're looking at. At the same time that it's a deep analysis of Lincoln, Joshua Wolf Shenk's book is somewhat of a history of science, so that we understand how Lincoln's feelings would have been perceived and would have influenced him within that moment in time. Sorry about the dogs. And how his feelings would have fueled his greatness, which is the subtitle of the book. So, I think some of the important points that come out in this story are that Abraham Lincoln suffered a great deal internally in terms of dealing with melancholy, which is a richer term for what we might consider today to be some form of depression or anxiety. And it was just by chance that he blossomed at exactly the time that he was needed to be elected as president. And Shenk doesn't hide his admiration for Lincoln at all. He considers Lincoln to be a great orator and a genuine person, like that characterization of honest Abe. But at the same time, it was an impossible moment in U.S. history. The party infighting, which we know nothing about today, had exacerbated an extremism around opinions around slavery, and essentially the Civil War was inevitable. And Lincoln's chief strategy that he developed through his own inner workings with his melancholy and trying to find a purpose and a passion in life was to put the greater good first, above himself. And in some cases, they led to unfortunate choices. He was an imperfect man, and his racism isn't avoided. But at the same time, we see other instances where this working outside of yourself becomes critical for our nation. And if you've never read the Gettysburg Address, highly recommend it. And it's similar. This greater good first similarly informed Lincoln's ideas for Reconstruction. But at the same time, he's a tragic hero because, as we all know, he didn't really get to influence Reconstruction at all. Yeah. I really liked this book, as I had mentioned before, because it helped me to understand a different way of thinking about my own depression and anxiety, and really seeing it not as a fault or flaw, but just as a different perspective. The critical reception of this book, it was written in 2005, takes on like 3 different themes. The first is it psychobiography? On the one hand, some reviewers say that it's not psychobiography because it examines the categories and limits of modern psychiatry, but falls short of offering a singular theory. But Melancholy in Innovations in Clinical Neuroscience argues the opposite, that it is a psychological biography, if only because, quote, it is comforting to see a man like Lincoln pull himself out of the psychological sewer, end quote. And if you've ever been there before, you know exactly what that feels like. And I think that connection to that feeling, the connection to feeling melancholy, to feeling despair, is something that distinguishes the reviewers. Some focus, I think, overly much on the political statements that that Shenk might have been trying to make in terms of comparing what Patricia Cohen wrote in the New York Times, the generally disappointing crop of national leaders today to the Prozac generation's addiction to cheeriness, which is the exact opposite of what Lincoln would have been dealing with at the time, because melancholy in that mid-19th century period wasn't seen as something to be ashamed about or something to hide. And at the same time, I do think it's important to consider this comparison in our current moment in time, as other reviewers have commented, that it's important to see the power of Lincoln to be able to combat modern stigmas against mental illness, or just against the imperfection and humanity of our major public figures. Anyway, so I was talking again about I think what distinguishes reviewers is of this book is their ability to have felt or connect with that sense of melancholy, and I think it's most apparent in how they talk about what we can know about Lincoln from this book. Patricia Cohen from the New York Times again writes that by drawing attention so frequently to the outermost expression of Lincoln's sadness, Shenk underscores how little we ultimately know about his innermost workings. But to contrast, Miller, writing for the Washington Post, says that looking at Lincoln's darkness also means approaching his depth. So, I I don't know what these reviewers have dealt with themselves, but I know that it's at least important to consider the humanity of our historical and contemporary, current figures and what that means to them. It's something that the field of history seems to struggle with a lot, is like how much agency, that's one of the big words, to offer historical figures or historical groups, and how far we should go to suggest intentions behind their actions. I think, and Miller at the Washington Post, his review does a really good job of drawing out this historiographical battle. But I think in terms of just approaching this book, it's I think it's important to think about how people are what move history forward, and Lincoln is a tragic hero, but he really did do a lot to take his situation and turn it into fuel for what he did, for leading the country through this incredibly difficult period of time. And I think we would all benefit from giving that same sense of critical and human thought to our leaders, and also take a bit of that ourselves and be more motivated to do good in this world that we are in right now. Anyway, I think that ended up being pretty preachy, but I really liked this book, and I'm excited to read more about Abraham Lincoln. I would highly recommend it for you, and I'd look forward to hearing or reading about your own take on Lincoln's Melancholy. Thanks for listening to my rambling, and I will see you again later.